When it comes to camera lenses, sometimes you need to ask yourself, how wide is too wide? A few years ago, Sigma released their 14 to 24 millimeter 2.8 Art Series lens, and then I feel like it kind of got some attention when it first came out, and then just sort of haven't heard much about it since. But I was recently able to borrow one, and it's definitely worth a second look. So just to start with the technical details, this is a 14 to 24 millimeter 2.8 Art Series lens, and I feel like at this point in time, Sigma has established their Art Series as being ultra high quality. Personally, I have no problem feeling that an Art Series lens is just as good as a Canon L Series lens. And this lens is incredibly well built. It's all metal construction with a metal lens mount. Everything feels really good. The zoom ring, the focus switch, everything feels really high quality and really sturdy. In fact, so much so that it's almost insane how heavy this lens is. On the old food scale, this lens comes in at a whopping 2.54. So by itself, this lens is 2.5 pounds. And there are heavy lenses out there, but this lens really isn't much different in size from the 16 to 35 f4 that I have from Canon. It's just a lot heavier. The 16 to 35 f4 is 1.4 pounds, so this lens is more than a pound heavier. These two lenses together, the 16 to 35 f4 versus the 14 to 24 2.8, they're very similar in height, but this lens is so much heavier. What it really feels like, honestly, is like you've taken the weight and the volume of a 70 to 200 and you've just compressed it into a smaller lens package. And unfortunately, when it's on the front of your camera, that can actually feel kind of heavy and imbalanced. So if you're walking around with this lens on your camera, it can feel sort of uncomfortable. It does not feel well weighted really at all. It's just like having a brick on the front of your camera. It does also have a built-in lens hood that you can't remove because the front element of this lens protrudes out and is rounded. So that also means that you have a weird lens cap to fit over the lens hood. And unfortunately, this lens cap isn't super easy to fit in your pocket or your bag, kind of like a normal lens cap would be. Now, it sounds like I'm completely just tearing this lens apart, but I guess it's a good idea to just get the cons out of the way first. So it is really heavy. It has a built-in hood that you can't remove. And unfortunately, because this front element does protrude out and because it's so large, that means it's not easy to use filters with this lens. If you're using something like the EOS R, you can get the drop-in filter adapter, which would mean that you'd have a filter sitting behind the lens, and that's awesome. It would totally solve the problem. But that's not a solution for everyone. Not everyone uses the EOS R, and not everyone has dropped $400 on that extra filter adapter. So by itself, using filters with this lens, definitely an issue. But those are really the main cons that I have found so far. It's heavy. The front element protrudes out, making it difficult to use filters. It makes your camera feel a bit unbalanced. All of those can be issues, but it's a weird lens, so it's going to have weird quirks. If you notice though, none of those cons have anything to do with image quality, because the image quality that comes out of this lens is fantastic, just like any Sigma art lens. It's crisp, it's sharp, the focus is really fast and really quiet. It's a very easy lens to use, and having 2.8, a nice wide open aperture at 14 millimeters is kind of insane, especially when you put it on a full frame camera like the EOS R. And that's really where this lens shines. It's a specialty lens. It's not a general everyday lens. Even at its furthest focal length, which is 24 millimeters, this lens is still pretty darn wide. And at its widest, 14 millimeters, it's insanely wide. So there are specific uses for this lens and specific uses not for this lens. But where this lens really does shine, one of the reasons it's built a little strange and has this protruding front element is because even though it is an ultra wide lens, it doesn't totally distort your image like a fisheye lens. If you get near the edge of the image, you definitely get some distortion, but if you frame your subject right in the center, you just get a really nice field of view. So you've seen some examples as I've been talking, but let's pop this lens on my camera right now to see what it looks like in here. Currently, I'm using the Sigma 24mm 1.4, and now we'll switch over to the Sigma 14 to 24 at 2.8. And there we go. It doesn't really look that different because this is the 24mm focal length. If I zoom all the way out, to 14, this is a wildly different situation than we were in before. Just to give you an idea of perspective, right now I am about a yardstick, about 3 feet away from the front of my camera, from the front of this lens. Can almost touch the camera if I reach my arm out as far as it goes, but you can see all 3 walls behind me. You can see the ceiling. This is huge. And you notice me being positioned in the middle, I don't really look distorted. I look pretty normal. If I put my arms out, then you can see some of that distortion and give some of those weird wide angle effects, but those aren't always bad. A couple minutes ago I used the word stylized to describe this lens, and I think that that is important. That's something you want to keep in mind. This lens is going to give you a certain style. It's not going to look like an ultra fast prime. It's not going to have a compressed field of view like a telephoto lens. This lens is its own thing altogether. So right now, even though I'm filming at f2.8, there's not a ton of background blur because it's just such a wide angle lens. But if you put a dominant subject close to the lens, that's when you're going to start to notice more background blur. And that wide angle with a blurry background is a really cool, really tough to achieve look. So why else would you want this lens? A big reason definitely is the price. This lens retails for about $1,200 to $1,300 usually, and its most direct competitor would probably be the Canon 16 to 35 2.8, which usually sells for about $2,000, sometimes a little less. And then Canon also recently just released the RF 15 to 35. So it's a native RF mount for the EOS R, the EOS RP, and any future cameras that are coming out with that lens mount. And that retails for usually I think $2,200, $2,300. So this lens is literally hundreds, if not close to $1,000 cheaper than the Canon counterparts. It doesn't have any image stabilization, but when you're dealing with a field of view that's this wide, it's not that hard to keep the camera steady. And if I push back into 24 millimeters, which looks much more like my normal shot, you can see that this lens still looks great. It doesn't look distorted and weird. It's nice and crisp and sharp. It's a really high quality lens that you don't need to only use for these weird, super wide angle stylized things. So in terms of practicality, it is probably better to have like a 16 to 35 because that extra length, the 35 millimeters, is probably more useful than the 1 or 2 extra millimeters of wideness when you're comparing the 16 to 35 and this 14 to 24. But for hundreds, if not close to $1,000 difference, maybe it is better to just stick with the wide lens like this. And there are times when you want the lens to be as wide as it can go. For example, I'm filming this on the EOS R. I film pretty much all my videos at 1080. But one of the things you know about the EOS R is it has a cropped 4K. Sometimes people are really upset about it. I did make a whole video about why it can actually be a useful thing. But in a setting like this, that cropped 4K can be a little bit tough. So for example, this is 1080p and this is 4K. So that crop, I didn't move the camera at all. I only changed the setting from 1080 to 4K, and you can see I feel a little bit claustrophobic. But if I push the lens all the way back out to 14 millimeters, now the shot feels normal again, and I feel a lot more comfortable in this frame. And now I can use the EOS R in 4K with that high bitrate, dual pixel autofocus, and still have a relatively wide field of view, even in a small room like this, in a compact environment that would normally be really hard to shoot in with that crop factor. Again, this is 14 millimeters with the 4K crop. And this is 24 millimeters with the 4K crop. So there's a pretty big difference. And then jumping all the way back to 1080p, now I have all the room in the world because this is just an insanely wide lens, especially on a full frame camera. So the other lens that probably comes to mind if you're looking at this is Sigma's 18 to 35 millimeter, which is truly like one of the best lenses I've ever used. It's a 1.8 lens. It's incredible, and it retails usually for like $800. But the reason that I haven't talked about that much is because I personally use full frame cameras, and that lens is designed for crop sensor cameras. So I'm looking for a wide angle full frame lens, and this 14 to 24 is just really fun to use. It's not something you'd probably use all the time, but wow, when you are using it, it's real fun. And even though I don't usually do like a ton of vlogging, this is literally me holding this camera, I don't know, 18 inches from my face, so it's pretty comfortable other than the fact that it's super duper heavy. But if you're holding the camera in front of you and you're trying to take a selfie or trying to do some vlogging, you don't need to have your arm extended super far away. It'll totally work just at a very comfortable distance from you. But wow, my arm, it's such a heavy lens, I don't know how long you could really do this for. So whether or not this lens is right for you obviously depends on your needs, but if you're looking for really high quality at a probably lower price than the Canon L series, I really don't think you can go wrong with the Sigma Art series of lenses. And this 14 to 24 millimeter is just like a real winner of a lens that I don't really hear a lot of people talking about or using, especially if you're in the market for an ultra wide like a 16 to 35. It's definitely worth checking this lens out. And lens videos are actually some of my favorite videos to make because they're so much fun, so I did put together a short playlist of some of the lens reviews and videos that I've made in the past for you to check out and maybe find something that works best for whatever your needs are.